Zero COVID policy has inflicted devastating economic pain, grinding entire cities to a halt for months.
Refusing to pay the mortgage on properties they've bought. The boycott involved more than 300 housing projects across more than 90 cities. S&P Global Rating Agency expects China's property sales to drop by around 30% this year. That would be worse than in the 2008 financial crisis.
China has had a disastrous beginning to 2022. Strict lockdowns have resulted in major business disruptions, with manufacturing slowing down significantly. With the year halfway done, its leaders have all but abandoned its economic goals for 2022, rather stating that they will do their utmost to achieve the best outcome for their economy, without expanding on what that means specifically. Of course, a major obstacle for China's economic growth has been its decision to abide to its COVID-0 stance, which has virtually stopped millions of Chinese from working. In July 2022, close to 30 million people were under some form of movement restrictions. Such restrictions have placed significant stress on the Chinese economy. China had originally targeted a 5.5% GDP growth this year. However, now, new estimates suggest the number will be closer to 3.3%. Consumer confidence is at a new all-time low, as many fear of future lockdowns, resulting in fewer businesses taking further risks in the future. In April, China's retail sales of consumer goods dropped by 11.1% compared to the year before. The immediate impact of the lockdowns was a gaping bite out of current economic activity, such as zero sales of automobiles in the city of Shanghai for a month or more. As you can see in the graph below, as of April, the auto industry had been hit the hardest, with sales having dropped by more than 30% compared to the year before. Shanghai, also a major shipping hub in the world, has caused disruptions to the supply chain networks. Shanghai is a hub for international imports and exports. A complete stop to any activity has made several delays, as seen with the graph below. With the lockdown restrictions, Chinese truckers, which are crucial to the Chinese supply chain network, have slowed down significantly. Freightos, which operates an online freight marketplace, estimates that Shanghai has lost roughly 45% of its trucking capacity since the end of March. With no drivers to collect the goods, those factories that are still running are scrambling to get products to customers and costs are soaring. We only have 20 to 30% of normal transport capacity remaining. Of course, I'm sure you all remember the Evergreen property crisis. Now in the middle of 2022, we are seeing China's property crisis burning the middle class stuck with huge loans. It is estimated that Chinese banks face $350 billion in losses from the property crisis. Confidence in the property sector is at all-time lows, which has triggered a mortgage boycott across more than 90 cities. This boycott on loans, worth as much as 2 trillion yuan, threatens to deepen China's real estate slump. It is estimated that Chinese developers have delivered only about 60% of homes that they pre-sold from 2013 to 2020. Unsurprisingly, China's Evergreen have seen the most boycotts, while also more than a dozen other builders have been targeted. 78% of household wealth in China is accounted in real estate. China's outstanding mortgages stood at 38.3 trillion yuan at the end of 2021. China's top 100 developers saw home sales slump in July, indicating an increasing mortgage boycott crisis emerging around the country. Combined contract sales plunged 39.7% from a year earlier to 523.1 billion yuan. Citigroup recently stated that sales are likely to remain soft for the rest of the year and developers face more liquidity challenges. A Bloomberg intelligent gauge of Chinese property developer shares slid as much as 2.3% to the lowest level since March. This is due to the Evergreen failing to propose a restructuring plan by the end of July as they had promised. China's Evergreen Group, perhaps the world's most famous and indebted developer, failed to deliver a preliminary restructuring plan he had promised by the end of July. Feeling risks, investors will grow more impatient. They instead offered a preliminary restructuring principles for its offshore debt. The stakes and concerns are very high, with $20 billion in dollar bonds among total liabilities of about $300 billion. This could be the biggest ever restructuring in Chinese history. The enormous size of Evergrene's debt has left global investors worried that a collapse could cause a financial contagion and curb growth in the world's second largest economy, which will have ripple effects across the world. The whole pyramid is now collapsing, said Anne Stevenson Yang, co-founder of J Capital Research. What's different is that things are worse now because of the Evergreen crisis a year ago, which is spreading its tentacles across the Chinese economy. The Chinese banks have taken an absolute beating over the last few months. For months, we've seen protests in the streets of Zhengzhou, Henan province, to demand their money after finding that their deposits had been frozen since April 18 at 4 banks. China's small banks are closely connected to local governments through companies they control, and these banks have exposure to the increasingly volatile real estate sector, making them more vulnerable to economic downturns than China's largest banks. One of the major disappointing factors of the Chinese economy has been its stock market. In 2022, the Hang Seng Tech Index has seen a 40% slump in the last year. The weakness highlighted by major volatility in Alibaba, Tencent Holdings, and others. The sector has already seen $2 trillion wiped out of the world's worst tech stock correction. And it doesn't look like it's going to get better anytime soon, as top Chinese strategists see stocks in limbo as GDP growth slows to 2%. Hao Hong, who was ranked the #1 China strategist by Asia Money in 2017 and 2018, said don't expect any record highs anymore during an interview with Bloomberg. He further stated that nobody can see what the new growth engine is or where to invest. Industries such as new energy or semiconductors could help lift growth, yet their contributions are just not enough to compensate for losses from the plunging property sector. The Chinese economy has grown at an average rate of 5.4% between 2019 and 2021. If growth were to decelerate to 2%, that would potentially further squeeze equity valuations, placing selling pressure on Chinese equities. Hong's main concern at the moment is China's too big to fail property sector. Construction and property sales have been the biggest engine of economic growth since President Xi came to power a decade ago. Home prices skyrocketed, surging 6-fold over the past 15 years, as an emerging middle class flocked to property as one of the safe investments available. Yet chaos in the housing market this year, including mass boycotts of mortgage payments from buyers who have yet to see homes completed by struggling developers, has triggered state intervention to fend off greater damage to China's financial system. However, probably the most concerning issue China is facing is its unemployment crisis, surging within the country. According to a report by Chinese finance website, employment manufacturing sector has continued to shrink this year, and it is at its lowest point in 27 months. The report attributes the layoffs to cost-cutting measures in factories and manufacturing, weak sales, and a very cautious attitude to hiring. Unemployment among 16 to 24-year-olds living in urban areas has increased to a record 19.3%, more than twice the comparable rate in the US. Young Chinese are losing faith, and it's resulting in an increasing disillusioned young population, willing to accept lower pay in the state sector. If this trend continues, growth in the world's second largest economy will suffer. This accounts to roughly 1 in 5 people out of work. The sheer number of jobless under 25s amounts to a 2 to 3% reduction in China's workforce, and fewer workers mean lower gross domestic product. China, being the second largest economy in the world, has had a very difficult 2022. This will have ripple effects that will go further than merely the Far East. We've already seen in America and many other westernized countries the enormous impact of a disrupted supply chain network, which relies heavily on China.